I call the honourable member Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Chair. This is about the separation of powers of the government. Under our system of government, there are three branches. There is the executive branch, headed by the Prime Minister. There is the parliamentary branch, headed by the Speaker, and the judicial branch, headed by the head of the Supreme Court. It is fundamental to protect our freedom and our democracy that those three branches are kept separate. That is why the intrusion by the Prime Minister's office into parliamentary affairs is fundamentally a threat to our democracy. So when the Chief of Staff of the Prime Minister's office sent an email to parliamentary services authorising the release of Peter Dunn's parliamentary emails, these are not his ministerial emails, these are his parliamentary emails on his parliamentary email server about a report which he received as a parliamentarian, that is, as the leader of the United Future Party. He never received it as a minister. We are dealing with an intrusion by the Prime Minister's office, in fact the Prime Minister's agent, the Chief of Staff, into the affairs of Parliament, and an attempt by the Prime Minister, the executive branch of government, to intrude into the affairs of the parliamentary branch. Now that is fundamentally important to the system of checks and balances in our democracy. If members of Parliament cannot protect their email accounts from the Prime Minister, if we cannot be sure that the Prime Minister can't come in and read our emails, and we cannot anymore because the Prime Minister has just done it, if we cannot protect our email accounts from the Prime Minister's office, then it becomes very difficult for us to perform our function of keeping the executive accountable. Because the executive has massive powers of surveillance and intrusion into our lives. The Prime Minister has special agencies called the GCSB and the SIS, which report directly to him, which have the ability to break into our email accounts and find out what we're up to. This is fundamental to our system of democracy and freedom, and it applies to the case of the journalist as well. Let's remember that the New Zealand Defence Force categorised journalists as subversives, right? That's how they categorise them in their manual. Now that is relevant to this case because under the New Zealand SIS Act, right, the SIS, its functions are to obtain intelligence relevant to security. And security means the protection of New Zealand from acts of espionage, sabotage and subversion. So if you can be defined by the government as a subversive, as journalists are defined by this government, the New Zealand Defence Force defines in that way, then you become a legitimate target for the SIS to break into your email account and read your emails. And if that happens to journalists trying to keep the executive responsible, then there's no way that we can have a functional democracy. If it happens to members of Parliament because the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff decides that he has some authority...
Order. I have a debate going on in the chamber and I have two either side of me. I call the honourable member Russell Norman.
If the Prime Minister's office, the Prime Minister Chief of Staff, decides that he has the authority to authorise the release of a Member of Parliament's email logs, then it fundamentally undermines our democratic process. There couldn't be a more serious breach than the Prime Minister's office authorising access to a Member of Parliament's email log. It goes to the very heart of why this institution exists. And if we are going to stand here and actually say, well, all those things that all those people fought for freedom and for democracy, we can't be bothered to fight this fight. The government of the day says, well, we've got every right to read everyone's emails. Then we simply are not doing our job. We have a fundamental duty to the people of New Zealand to protect freedom, to protect democracy, and we can only do that if Parliament itself protects its right not to be intruded on by the Executive, by the Prime Minister's office. And that's what this debate is about. And that's why Peter Dunn's parliamentary email account is so important to this debate, and the fact that the Prime Minister's office, the Henry inquiry authorised by the Prime Minister's office, saw itself fit to break into Peter Dunn's email account without his consent. Remember, Peter Dunn never gave his consent for the David Henry inquiry to do it. It cuts to the heart of our democracy.
Right. The question is that vote parliamentary service stand part. The question is that vote parliamentary services stand part of the schedules. Those of that opinion will please say aye. The contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question now is that vote communications, security and intelligence stand part of the schedules. I call the honourable member David Shearer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.